You guys seem to like the first part, so as promised, here's a part 2 of the 7 deadly sins as dinosaur villains. The first 3 sins I covered were greed, gluttony and pride, so that leaves us with envy, lust, wrath and sloth. I'm not gonna lie, it was a bit hard to find representatives for the other sins, since these are dinosaurs after all, so some of the ones I choose are not the absolute embodiment of the sin, but some of their actions do correlate with it. Now that you're all caught up, let's get right into it. Wrath is the extreme feeling of hatred or desire to cause harm or injury. Now this sin can correlate with a few dinosaurs. I'm sure some of you can name a few, but for me personally I don't think any can represent the sin any better than Primal's crash out, the infected sauropod. Primal has a bunch of weird and quite frankly freaky things, from spiders the size of a cabin to eldritch horrors that can warp reality. These are just some of the things the main characters have to go through. The show revolves around a caveman called Spear and a female T-Rex called Fang who travel around the world together. Now they've been through a lot of stuff, but I don't think they've ever met something as hateful as the infected sauropod. This sauropod started out as a normal animal eating fruit and being an overall chill dude. But then some Parasaurolophus on Galaxy Gas bites him and spreads the infection. When the infection does take over the sauropod's body, he geeks out, which is why this episode is titled Plague of Madness. This sickness erases any thought of rational behavior and causes the host to experience an unforeseen amount of rage, killing anything that's living. The sickness, as we will see later, grants the host infinite stamina and makes them not feel pain, or just makes the host override it. The sauropod kills the entire herd in a horrific manner, breaking ribs and ripping out chunks of the necks. When our 2 main characters stumble across the massacre, they are mortified as to what could have caused this much destruction. And let me tell you, the look on their faces when they see a cracked out sauropod that looks like it caught every STI in Miami is priceless. So a chase happens and this sauropod is relentless, crashing through forests and destroying rocks just to get to Spear and Fang, who are tiny in comparison. Like, do you know the hate it takes to not only chase something for that long, but to also jump off a cliff blindly to kill them? Spear and Fang get a lucky break when they crawl through a small cave in the canyon wall. The fall doesn't kill the sauropod though, it just causes him to get a small tantrum and then fall asleep. When it turns to night, Spear and Fang try to sneak past it, but nothing gets past the oldest hater in existence. Another chase scene ensues where the big guy is stuck between the canyons and can't get to Spear and Fang who are walking over a barely solid magma lake. But the amount of anger in this thing causes it to rip its skin from its ribcage just so that it can get to Spear and Fang. The final chase happens and this thing destroys a good amount of the area, falling into the lava at one point and still trying to get to those 2. Soon though, it is completely engulfed in flames and is burnt to ash. The look on Spear's face says it all. It was a sympathetic look, so I think he knew the animal was sick. Yes, it technically wasn't the sauropod that was so hateful, but the sickness causes him to develop so much wrath that he cleared the forest, jumped off a cliff, and ripped the skin off of his ribcage to get to 2 tiny in comparison organisms. But in the end, that same anger and madness led him to be burnt to a crisp and finally put to rest. So it was hard for me to find a dinosaur villain that represents the sin of sloth, since most of them are usually up and about killing something. But I think this one could kind of fit. Sloth is the lack of spiritual or physical effort and generally not caring about what happens around you or anyone else. I think one dinosaur that could fit this is the torvosaurus from Dinosaur Evolution. Now I know some of you are going to get mad, and some may say he's not a villain at all, but he kinda is. If you guys can give a villain that represents the sin of sloth any better, you can leave it in the comments. This episode of Dinosaur Evolution focuses on a now adult Allosaurus called Broken Jaw, who was the top dog of his patch of land, up until now the largest predator of the Jurassic, since the Saurophagonax is now a sauropod apparently, the Torvosaurus. So the reason I put him for the sin of sloth is due to a small portion of the episode, where he's sitting at the top of the hill and completely ignores Broken Jaw. Now most predators would immediately try to eliminate any competition, even if it's smaller. It's like what tigers and lions do to leopards who are 2 to 3 times smaller, but this guy is just too lazy to be bothered. Now I've seen some people saying he just didn't see Broken Jaw as a threat, and even if that was the case, no normal predator is just gonna let that slide. I mean, lions are some of the most lazy animals on the planet, and if they see even one hyena or leopard within a 100-meter radius, they full on spring into action and try to kill them. So Broken Jaw starts inching closer and closer to the significantly larger sauropod. He then basically right in his face does a threat display, which included stomping and screaming at the top of his lungs to try and intimidate the torvosaurus. Now I don't know about you, but if I'm chilling in nature and some dude comes right up in my face and starts screaming at me, I'd probably address it. But the torvosaurus just puts his head down and attempts to go back to sleep, instead of just dealing with it. Only until Broken Jaw makes physical contact with the torvosaurus does he finally decide to get up. He wrestles Broken Jaw to the floor and is about to kill him, but a small pterosaur flies in his face, temporarily distracting him, and Broken Jaw slips away. Instead of chasing after the nuisance, he just stands there a bit puzzled. To be fair, it probably isn't worth chasing after something that fast. For the remainder of the episode, he's being a typical predator, surveying his new territory for prey. He sets his sight on a juvenile sauropod, as expected. But what I don't get is why he didn't just kill the adult. Yes, I know most predators don't attack adults larger than them to avoid injury, but he literally brought the adult sauropod to the floor with little effort. I'm sure he could have killed it with its neck exposed. It would have been a bit more work, but he would have gotten way more food. He abandons the adult and rushes over to the juvenile, which is when Broken Jaw arrives and bites this guy on the neck. But the torvosaurus easily pulls him off. However, while he was distracted, the adult sauropod rises up on his hind legs and crushes the carnivore. I'm not gonna lie, as a child this death kinda made me angry since it was so anticlimactic. If he had just put a bit more effort, he could have killed the adult while it was on the floor. And for those saying it's just a dinosaur documentary and I'm going too in depth in it, it is, but those animals do display a lot of human traits. We see some of these animals smile, show anger, and other facial expressions, as well as emotions such as grief. In the end, it didn't matter. If he had just taken care of Broken Jaw from the start, he wouldn't have met his end at the very thing that was supposed to be his food. The final candidate is by far the most evil dinosaur villain in existence, and it's not a competition. Like this guy himself can represent most of the deadly sins. And because of that, he's actually representing the last two, which are lust and envy. The reason being that I just couldn't find any other dinosaurs that could represent lust, and he actually fits these two sins really well. Lust is the intense desire for sexual gratification, and envy is the feeling of jealousy or resentment towards someone's success or possession, and One Eye perfectly fits these two. One Eye comes from the movie Dinosaur King, which stars a tarbosaurus called Speckles. One Eye is a grizzled tyrannosaurus who's missing one eye. But I've talked about him and his crimes so much in other videos, so I'll just focus on his relations with these two sins. Speckles at the start of the movie is a baby and has an older brother, two sisters and a mom, who are the owners of this large patch of territory filled with prey. When One Eye sees this, he is pissed off. He can't stand seeing the tarbosaurs in such a good habitat, while he lived in basically a rocky valley. So like Scar, he devises a plan to overthrow the owners of the area. He starts a stampede of basically every large herbivore in the valley to kill Speckles and his family. In the process, he kills the two sisters and Speckles' older brother, as well as hundreds of other dinosaurs in minutes. Finally, he challenges Speckles' mother in a 1v1 and throws her off a cliff. So after who knows how many years of jealousy for the Tarbosaurus territory, he finally got it, and immediately moves into the prime spot where Speckles' family used to stay. He then chases Speckles out of the territory, where he's then left to fend for himself. After some time, Speckles meets a juvenile female Tarbosaurus called Blue Eyes when he's a teenager. When they are sub-adults, they run into One Eye again, but they escape after a very one-sided fight. 20 years pass and Speckles and Blue Eyes become young adults, and are many miles away from One Eye's territory, but One Eye still tracks them down. He throws a boulder off a cliff when Speckles and Blue Eyes were eating, which knocks him into a lake. Now this is where it starts to get dark even for villain standards. One Eye comes down to the ridge when Blue Eyes is alone. The narration then says he traveled all of this way, which is more than likely over 100 miles to find a mate. After hearing this, I had to take a complimentary water break because what? Anyway, he tries to force himself onto Blue Eyes, and the more she resists, the more he beats her up. And the crazy part about this is that they're not even the same species. Like, do you know how horny you have to be not only to travel hundreds of miles, but also to do it with something that's not your own species? However, Speckles comes back from the lake and defeats him finally, and retakes his mother's old territory. He has kids, but then Blue Eye is killed by a plague of velociraptors. At the end, One Eye tracks him down again near the ocean on a ledge and kills one or two of his kids, I can't remember. And just before he can kill the last one, called Junior, Speckles comes in and fights him. They end up fighting in the ocean after Speckles jumped in to save his child. and then One Eye meets his end to a 100-foot long Tylosaurus. Speckles and his son then make it to shore and they have a happy ending. One Eye may be dead, but I'm sure he'll be remembered by Speckles forever. He was so envious that he killed an entire family for their home, and so horny that he was willing to commit SA just to pass on his genes. I don't know how much worse it can get. That's just about a wrap for this video. I'm thinking about doing another list like this, but for animal villains in general. You guys can let me know if that's something you'd want to see. So hit that like and subscribe button, since it really does help the channel so I can continue making vids like these. That'll be all for today folks, I'll see you in the next video.